The alien girl sat in the corner of her cold, metallic cell. The dim glow from the overhead lights reflected off the rusted chains binding her wrists and ankles, their edges biting into her soft, iridescent skin. Her eyes, a striking hue of amber, once full of life and wonder, now gazed blankly at the floor, void of hope. Her breath was shallow, her frame frail from days without sustenance, and the damp air clung to her like a suffocating weight. She couldn't recall how long she had been there. Time blurred into a relentless cycle of pain and exhaustion. Her captors spoke in guttural tones she couldn't fully understand, but the intent behind their words was clear. She was a trophy, a living prize of their conquest. They paraded her like a rare artifact, mocking her as she struggled to stand under their scrutinizing gazes. They didn't see her as a being with thoughts, feelings, or a story of her own. To them, she was an object, a specimen to control and exploit. Her mind often drifted to memories of her home. She had lived in a serene world of soft colors and harmonious energy, where her kind thrived in peace. They had no weapons, no defenses. There had never been a need. The invaders had shattered that tranquility in an instant. She remembered the fire in the skies, the screams of her people, and the cold, rough hands that dragged her away. She was one of the few who had survived the initial assault, and survival had proven to be a curse. Each day brought new torment. They forced her to endure endless experiments, probing her body for traits and abilities they could exploit. The cruelty wasn't only physical, it was psychological. They stripped her of her dignity, chaining her to a post like a feral creature. Her captors jeered as they threw scraps of food at her feet, laughing when she hesitated to take them. Hunger always won in the end, and the shame of her captivity deepened with every bite. Despite the crushing despair, a small ember of defiance burned within her. She refused to give her captors the satisfaction of seeing her beg. She clung to fragments of hope, no matter how fragile. Sometimes, she would catch a glimpse of something outside her cell, a fleeting movement, a shadow that didn't belong to the guards. It was faint, but it stirred a flicker of curiosity within her dulled senses. Her chains rattled as she adjusted her position, leaning against the cold, unyielding wall. She closed her eyes, letting her mind wander. There had to be more than this. Someone somewhere must have noticed her absence. Her people wouldn't abandon her. At least, that's what she told herself during the long, sleepless nights. But with each passing day, that hope felt more like a distant dream, slipping further out of reach. Her captors often spoke of her in hushed tones, their voices tinged with both fear and greed. She wasn't entirely sure what made her so valuable to them. Perhaps it was the subtle glow of her skin under certain lights, or the faint energy she radiated when she was calm. Whatever it was, it had turned her into a prize they weren't willing to part with. They guarded her cell day and night, their weapons always within reach. Escape seemed impossible. But then, something unusual happened. A small loaf of bread appeared in her cell one morning, fresher and larger than the scraps she usually received. It wasn't thrown at her or accompanied by mocking laughter. It simply sat there, placed carefully within her reach. She stared at it for a long time, her mind racing. This was no act of kindness from her captors. It had to be something else. Days passed, and more small acts of mercy followed. A blanket appeared on a particularly cold night. Her water bowl was filled with clean, fresh water instead of the murky sludge she was used to. Each time, she searched the shadows for any sign of who might be responsible, but she found nothing. Still, these small gestures gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: relief, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. She began to notice subtle changes around her. The guards seemed less vigilant, their attention drawn elsewhere. Once, she thought she heard a whispered voice outside her cell, speaking in a tone far softer than the harsh barks of her captors. She pressed her ear to the cold metal door, straining to hear, but the voice faded before she could make out the words. Her instincts told her something was happening. She didn't know what or why, but she felt a shift in the air. It wasn't freedom, at least not yet, but it was enough to stir her weary heart. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the walls of her cell. She pictured herself standing under the open sky, the chains no longer weighing her down. It was a fragile dream, but it was hers, and she held onto it with all her strength. The human had never intended to involve himself in such matters. His role in the alien world was transactional, a simple existence built around trading resources and information to survive. He had navigated through different alien societies, mastering their languages and customs, avoiding unnecessary conflict. To him, survival was about keeping a low profile, ensuring he was neither ally nor enemy. But something about the girl's situation gnawed at him. At first, he told himself it wasn't his problem. He had seen cruelty before, witnessed countless injustices, and hardened his heart against the endless brutality of the galaxy. He knew how dangerous it was to care in a world where caring could get you killed. Yet, every time he passed her cell, the sight of her chained and dehumanized left an ache he couldn't ignore. Her eyes were haunting, filled with a pain he could no longer pretend not to see. He began to notice details he hadn't paid attention to before. The way she flinched when guards approached, the way her body seemed to shrink under their mocking laughter. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a symbol of everything wrong with the universe's power dynamics. He saw how she was treated like an object, a possession, rather than a living, breathing individual. The more he observed, the harder it became to push away the thought that he might be her only chance. His hesitation wasn't born of cowardice. He knew exactly what would happen if he got caught. The aliens were ruthless, their justice swift and merciless. They wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who interfered with their control. He was already walking a fine line as an outsider in their world, tolerated only because he served a purpose. One wrong move could cost him everything. Yet, despite the risks, he couldn't ignore the growing weight of his conscience. He found himself lingering near her cell longer than he should, watching her when the guards weren't looking. Her silent resilience moved him in a way he couldn't explain. She didn't beg, didn't plead for help, but the quiet strength in her gaze spoke volumes. It reminded him of something he thought he'd lost, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. He began to formulate a plan. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it was riddled with uncertainties. But he knew waiting for the perfect moment would only ensure that it never came. He spent days studying the guards' routines, noting when shifts changed and when security was at its weakest. He observed the layout of the facility, memorizing every exit and potential hiding spot. Each detail was critical. There would be no second chances. Gathering resources was the next challenge. He needed tools to break the chains, a way to disable the surveillance systems, and a distraction to divert attention at the right moment. Every step required careful planning, as even the smallest misstep could expose his intentions. He leveraged his trading connections to acquire what he needed, disguising his true purpose behind mundane transactions. The hardest part was deciding when to act. He couldn't risk moving too soon, but the longer he waited, the greater the chance that something could go wrong. He had heard whispers among the guards about plans to move the girl to a more secure location, possibly for further experiments or even execution. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He didn't have the luxury of time. As the day approached, he prepared himself mentally for what was to come. He wasn't a hero or a soldier. He was just a man trying to do the right thing. Doubts crept in, reminding him of the odds stacked against him. But then he would think of her, the way her spirit seemed to shine through even in the darkest moments, and his resolve would harden. When the time finally came, he moved with calculated precision. His hands trembled slightly as he approached her cell, knowing that any noise or misstep could bring everything crashing down. He whispered softly, trying to convey trust and reassurance. She stared at him with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief, her body tense and ready to recoil. He couldn't blame her. She had no reason to trust him. Unlocking her chains was both a physical and emotional act. The cold metal resisted at first, as if it were determined to hold her captive forever. But when the final lock clicked open, it was as though a weight had been lifted from both of them. She didn't speak, but the gratitude in her eyes was unmistakable. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding patrols. His heart pounded with every step, the fear of discovery pressing down on him. He could feel her hesitance, the way she lingered behind him, unsure if freedom was truly within reach. He glanced back at her, offering a small nod of encouragement. For the first time, he saw a flicker of hope in her expression. Every corner they turned felt like a gamble, every corridor a potential trap. But he had done his homework, and his meticulous planning paid off. They encountered obstacles, of course, locked doors, unexpected patrols. But he managed to navigate each one with a mixture of luck and determination. The girl followed closely, her steps growing steadier as they progressed. As they neared the exit, he allowed himself a brief moment to reflect on what he was doing. He had risked everything for someone he didn't know, someone who might never fully understand the danger he had faced for her. But as he looked at her, he realized it didn't matter. This was about more than just her. It was about proving to himself that he could still make a difference in a universe that often seemed devoid of compassion. The final stretch was the most dangerous, with guards patrolling heavily near the main exit. He had anticipated this, setting up a distraction earlier to draw them away. It wasn't foolproof, but it gave them just enough of an opening to slip through unnoticed. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, a sense of relief washed over him. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot, but they had taken the first step. For now that was enough. The alarm blared through the facility, its shrill sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Lights flashed in rapid succession, bathing the corridors in alternating shades of red and white. The guards scrambled into action, shouting orders and fanning out in search of the escapees. Chaos erupted as the system alerted everyone to the breach, and the hunt began with ruthless efficiency. The tension was palpable, the kind that made each step feel like walking on the edge of a blade. Every sound echoed, amplifying the risk of discovery. The human stayed focused, his mind racing to anticipate their next move. The alien girl followed closely, her trust evident in the way she mirrored his movements without hesitation. Her fear was evident, but so was her determination. She was no longer just a prisoner being led to safety. She was an active participant in her own liberation. Their journey through the facility became a dangerous game of strategy and timing. The guards weren't just mindless brutes. They were trained, coordinated, and relentless in their pursuit. Every turn brought new challenges. Corridors blocked by patrols, security drones scanning the area, and surveillance systems tracking every movement. The human's careful planning was now put to the ultimate test. He relied on every detail he had memorized, using his knowledge of the facility's layout to find alternative routes and avoid direct confrontations. At one point, they found themselves cornered, with no clear path forward. The human's mind worked rapidly, weighing their options and assessing the risks. He spotted an old ventilation shaft partially hidden behind a stack of crates. It wasn't an ideal route. It was narrow, unstable, and potentially dangerous, but it was their only chance. Without hesitation, he motioned for the alien girl to follow him, and they disappeared into the cramped space. The escape was grueling, every second stretching into an eternity. The shaft was hot, suffocating, and filled with the metallic tang of rust. Their movements had to be deliberate and silent, as even the slightest noise could betray their location. The human could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. Outside the shaft, the guards intensified their efforts. Their voices grew louder, closer, as they coordinated their search. The human and the alien girl reached a junction, where the shaft split into two paths. The human paused, listening intently for any sign of activity. Choosing the wrong path could lead them straight into the hands of their pursuers. He made a quick decision, trusting his instincts, and led her down the left passage. His gamble paid off as they emerged in an abandoned maintenance area, temporarily out of immediate danger. In this brief moment of respite, the human turned to the alien girl, his eyes scanning her face for any signs of distress. Despite the exhaustion etched into her features, she met his gaze with a resolve that surprised him. She wasn't broken. She was fighting alongside him, and her determination fueled his own. He gestured for them to keep moving, knowing that staying in one place for too long would only invite disaster. As they pressed on, the human began to notice subtle changes in the alien girl. She moved with more confidence, her steps lighter and more assured. It was clear that her survival instincts were kicking in, and she was starting to adapt to the situation. Her eyes, once filled with despair, now held a spark of hope. It was a reminder of why he had taken this risk in the first place. She wasn't just a victim. She was someone worth saving. Their bond grew stronger with each passing moment. There was no need for words. Their actions spoke volumes. The human's protective instincts drove him to shield her from harm, while her quiet strength inspired him to keep going. They became a team, working in unison to navigate the treacherous terrain of the facility. Their connection transcended language and species, built on a shared desire for freedom and survival. The facility's architecture, designed to trap and control, now became their greatest adversary. The human had to rely on his ingenuity and resourcefulness to outmaneuver the guards. He used every tool at his disposal, from disabling electronic locks to creating distractions that drew their pursuers away. It was a constant battle of wits, a test of his ability to stay one step ahead. As they neared the outer perimeter, the challenges became even more daunting. The guards had set up barricades and checkpoints, narrowing the escape routes and increasing the chances of capture. The human knew that their odds of making it out unscathed were slim, but he refused to give up. He scanned the area for any potential weaknesses, searching for a way to bypass the heavily guarded exits. Then an opportunity presented itself. A delivery vehicle was parked near the loading bay, its engine still running. It was a risky move, but it offered a chance to slip past the guards undetected. The human formulated a plan, outlining it to the alien girl with quick gestures. She nodded, understanding the urgency of the situation. Together, they made their way toward the vehicle, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the watchful eyes of the guards. The final moments of their escape were a blur of adrenaline and chaos. The human hot-wired the vehicle, and the engine roared to life. The guards reacted immediately, shouting orders and opening fire. The alien girl crouched low, clutching the edge of her seat as the human navigated the vehicle through the narrow passageways. The sound of gunfire and the screech of tires filled the air, creating a cacophony of noise that echoed through the facility. Despite the odds, they broke through the final barrier and emerged into the open night. The cool air rushed in, carrying with it a sense of liberation. The facility faded into the distance, its menacing silhouette shrinking as they sped away. The human glanced at the alien girl, her expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had done it, they were free. The journey was far from over, but they had taken the first and most crucial step. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the alien girl was no longer a prisoner. She was free, and the human's resolve to protect her burned brighter than ever. Together, they ventured into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The night air felt foreign to her, a mixture of liberation and uncertainty. Each step away from the facility was a step into an unfamiliar world, and the vastness of it all left her momentarily overwhelmed. The human kept his pace steady, glancing back occasionally to ensure she was keeping up. There was no need for words. Both knew the danger wasn't entirely behind them. Their freedom was fragile, and the threat of pursuit loomed large. The first task was finding safety, a place far enough from the facility to regroup and plan their next move. The human guided her toward a secluded area he had scouted in advance, a patch of wilderness that provided cover and a brief reprieve. They moved with purpose, their movements cautious and deliberate. The alien girl followed his lead, her trust in him growing with every step. When they finally stopped, exhaustion took over. She sank to the ground, her body trembling from the strain of their escape. The human handed her a small container of water and some food he had packed, his actions careful and non-threatening. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted, her hunger and thirst overriding her wariness. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't forced to fight for scraps or endure humiliation to meet her basic needs. The quiet allowed her to take in her surroundings. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their rustling leaves a stark contrast to the sterile coldness of her former prison. The sky stretched endlessly above them, dotted with stars that seemed to glow brighter than she remembered. It was beautiful, but it was also overwhelming. She wasn't sure what to do with this freedom, how to process a world without chains and walls. The human sat a short distance away, giving her space, but keeping a watchful eye. His silence was deliberate, a recognition of her need to process everything at her own pace. He had no idea what she had endured, but he understood that escape was only the first step. Healing would take time, and trust even longer. He didn't push her to speak or explain herself, he simply let her be. Gradually, she began to relax. The absence of immediate threats allowed her to let her guard down, if only slightly. She studied the human, trying to understand him. He was unlike anyone she had encountered before, kind, patient, and unassuming. He didn't treat her as an object or an experiment. Instead, he seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being, a fact that both puzzled and reassured her. As the hours passed, their dynamic began to shift. She started asking questions, her voice soft and hesitant at first. He answered each one with care, his tone steady and devoid of judgment. She learned about his past, his journey through the galaxy, and the circumstances that had brought him to the facility. In return, she shared fragments of her own story, bits and pieces of her life before captivity. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Their conversations were interspersed with moments of silence, comfortable pauses that allowed them to reflect. The human used these lulls to focus on practical matters, like mapping out their next move. He knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. The aliens would be searching for them, and their resources were limited. He explained his plan to her, outlining the risks and challenges they would face. She listened intently, her expression a mix of apprehension and determination. Despite the uncertainty of their future, the bond between them grew stronger. They began working together, pooling their strengths to navigate the challenges ahead. The alien girl's unique abilities, which had made her a target for her captors, now became an asset. She used her heightened senses to detect threats before they emerged, her sharp instincts complementing the human's strategic thinking. Their partnership was seamless, built on mutual respect and a shared desire for survival. Each day brought new obstacles. They had to evade patrols, find food and water, and stay ahead of their pursuers. The alien girl proved to be resourceful, adapting quickly to the demands of their situation. The human marveled at her resilience, her ability to persevere despite everything she had endured. She wasn't just surviving. She was reclaiming her agency, taking control of her destiny one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, their journey took them through a variety of landscapes, dense forests, barren deserts, and rocky terrains. Each environment presented its own set of challenges, but they faced them together, their trust in one another solidifying with every trial. The alien girl began to smile again, her laughter a rare but treasured sound that reminded the human of why he had taken this risk in the first place. Their conversations became deeper, more personal. They talked about their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. The human shared stories of his homeworld, painting vivid pictures of a place she could only imagine. She, in turn, described the beauty of her lost home, the vibrant landscapes and harmonious culture that had been stolen from her. These moments of connection became the foundation of their relationship, a reminder that they were more alike than they were different. Eventually, they reached a remote outpost, a hidden sanctuary where they could finally rest without fear of being discovered. The human had connections there, individuals who owed him favors and were willing to help without asking too many questions. The alien girl was hesitant at first, wary of strangers, but the human's reassurances gave her the courage to trust them. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. With safety came the opportunity to heal. The alien girl began to shed the weight of her past, her spirit slowly mending as she embraced her newfound freedom. The human watched with quiet pride, knowing that her recovery was a testament to her strength and resilience. He had given her a chance, but she had seized it with everything she had.